members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application, I'd like to make a few comments for the benefits of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. So we are resuming debate. This is on the motion that was moved by MP Terry Beach and the friendly amendment that was moved by MP Vaughn Baker. And last speakers we had, I believe it was MP Chambers and then MP Lawrence were both on the list. So MP Chambers and then I've got MP Morantz after that.
Me, yeah.
Okay.
Are we waiting? Oh. I guess it's all virtual. Hopefully everybody's comfortable at home. We are unfortunately in the same position we were at. I heard there was no real subcommittee meeting since the last meeting. From my perspective, it seems like the committee was asked to slightly adjust its protocol to do a pre-study, which has happened before. But typically, as precedent has been, at least from my understanding, that when that happens, there's a bit of a negotiation about how we can agree to set some protocol aside to allow a pre-study, which seems reasonable. Many members of the committee, I think, believed there was a reasonable compromise, and yet that doesn't seem to be palatable for the government. For the benefit of others, we just had inflation reading today. Inflation is 3 times the Bank of Canada's target rate of 2%. It's been that way for well over a year. If the committee is going to continue to push forward government legislation in a reasonable fashion, the committee should also expect that the executive branch is accountable for its decisions and the outcomes and what's happening in the economy. And quite frankly, it is entirely reasonable and should even just be as a matter of practice that on a regular basis, outside of any appearances for legislation, that both the Bank of Canada governor and the finance minister appear at the committee, at least multiple times a year. In times of inflation, prolonged inflation, I would think it would make a lot of sense for Canadians to feel that their executive branch and those policymakers are being held accountable for literally the only thing that they're supposed to do, which is to keep inflation in between 1% and 3%. When it is not within 1% and 3%, I think it would make sense to have the Bank of Canada governor come every time they release a monetary policy report and say, here's what we're doing, here's the target, here's what we're doing to bring it back to target so that we can hold institutions accountable. And the bank governor has been willing to come to this committee before, and I thank him for that. And I don't think he would be upset with the request to come on a more regular basis. The challenge here is the Minister of Finance doesn't want to appear before the committee on inflation. We passed an inflation study 12 months ago that asked for the minister to come to appear on inflation, and she has yet to appear in the committee. But she wants to come when we require her to pass her legislation. She's quite happy to come to the committee when the minister needs something, and not happy to come when all of the committee members who passed the inflation study requested the presence of the minister. So the compromise, I actually think, is quite reasonable. While inflation is well outside the control range, or outside the control range at all, and until it comes back down, Every 3 months, this committee and Canadians get to hear from and question and hold accountable the Minister of Finance and the Bank of Canada governor on what they are doing to get inflation back down. It is the only job of the Bank of Canada. And it's the Minister of Finance who sets the Bank of Canada mandate. So don't you think that the Minister of Finance would love the opportunity to come in front of Canadians to talk about what the government is doing to help Canadians with inflation? I think it seems rather odd that as we're entering a period of economic uncertainty, that the minister is interested in hiding from Canadians. Not interested to actually stand in front of the committee and answer for the record. And I think, you know, there's all this discussion in the media and around, you know, circles, elite chattering classes about how, you know, populism and going after institutions. The way we hold institutions accountable is at committees like this. The way we give the public confidence about our institutions is when we can hold them accountable and when we can hold the members of the executive accountable. That's how we hold these institutions accountable, is in the public, asking questions, and every 3 months is quite actually a reasonable ask in my view. And I would think most ministers who are in that position would want the opportunity to tell the story of the government. And
Point of order, Chair. Point of order.
MP Baker?
I just like to remind us that Mr. Beach put forward an amendment, put forward a motion, I should say, and I put forward an amendment to that motion. And that's the subject of the matter at hand. And I don't think that Mr. Chambers is speaking to the amendment. That's what we should be discussing here today, so we can get back to work for Canadians. Thank you.
could
MP
the
Baker, yeah, MP,
could the member
MP
read?
Chambers, yeah.
Thank you. Could the member, just for the benefit of the committee, read his amendment into the record? Thank you.
Well, it's already been read into the record. We do have.
I'm sorry. Like
So we have the motion as amended by MP Baker, but yes, we're speaking to this motion as
Okay.
amended.
So, for the benefit of those at home who may be tuning in for the first time, could we have the gist of the sub-amendment mentioned here again?
Okay, so if we go through the motion and as amended, we've got that the chair scheduled meetings to initiate a pre-study on the act to implement certain provisions of the fall economic statement, and the first meeting take place on Monday, November 14th, should legislation be presented in the House by that time, and that the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance be invited to appear with her officials on the bill, and all evidence gathered as part of the pre-study be considered as evidence in the committee's full study of the bill. And should the bill be referred to committee by Thursday, November 24th, a clause-by-clause study of bill commence no later than Wednesday, November 30th. B, amendments to the bill be submitted by 5 p.m. Thursday, November 24th. And C, that the committee immediately proceed to this study and hear from officials from the Department of Finance. And that's what we're discussing right now.
And the sub-amendment?
That is
part of
with
it?
the friendly sub-amendment, yes.
So we can talk about process, about the sub-amendment. We are being asked as a committee to set aside the regular process that we typically follow with legislation and do the government a favor by allowing a pre-study. That's what the motion's about. That's what the sub-amendment's about. And the point that some of us are making on this side is that if the government would like a favor from the committee, then it should be willing to compromise on a few points. That seemed like we actually made some progress for a brief period of time, but not enough to avoid the situation we're currently in. So if the government would like a favor, then it should be prepared to compromise. And so I think it's completely on the same point to outline what that compromise is. But maybe the government doesn't want Canadians to know the compromise that they're not willing to accept. That's okay. But I mean, we can do this until the bill gets referred to the committee and just go along with the regular process. I mean, that seems like that's kind of the path we're on now, but that's, you know, if the government's looking to fast track the legislation, it's not accomplishing its goal. It could easily accomplish the goal. We have a reasonable deal to get this done. But again, the government is expecting this committee to set aside the way it generally deals with legislation to advance its legislative agenda. That's fair enough. But if it's asking for a favor, it should be prepared to do one in return. I think it's completely reasonable. Will likely have more to say after, but I appreciate the opportunity to start this meeting and would probably recommend at some point during the meeting, we allow members to convene for a moment to see if there's any movement. If not, that's okay, but we should at least provide the opportunity for the parliamentary secretary and others to get together. Unfortunately, they didn't have a subcommittee meeting this week. And I appreciate, you know, the interventions on my colleague's point, but I think it drives the bigger point home, or this bigger issue home, which is we're debating a motion in which the government is asking us to set aside the typical protocol. And on that basis, we're asking for something in return, or a couple things, or even something small. If you don't like the compromise, come up with another solution. But if you say you're not going to compromise on anything, then I guess we could stay here for a while. And then maybe I'll return and zoom in so I can be comfortable at home. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Chambers. I have MP Lawrence, MP Morantz, MP Beach, MP Chattel.
Perfect. Mr. Chair, could you tell us how long we can run this meeting till tonight?
I believe we have 2 hours of resources. Yeah. 2 hours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just for the folks at home, and of course in the House of Commons I can't do this, but in committee I'm more than in my rights to do this. There are no Liberals other than the chair in this room right now. We, as Conservatives, stand ready to negotiate, but it's impossible to negotiate with someone who won't even get in the same room with you. This is an embarrassment for democracy. Really, shame on you. Shame on you for not going into the room with us. And so we stand here ready to negotiate, ready to talk about the amendments, even willing to perhaps go forward with a pre-study. But we need a partner. We need someone who's willing to talk to us, who's willing to be in the same room as us. And so when we look at this, it appears to me that without I don't think this is like telling any tales out of school here, and I think it's been pretty open about this. In terms of going forward with the pre-study, this government's these Liberals' main objection is accountability. They don't want transparency. The deputy leader doesn't want to appear in front of the Finance Committee. So let's call a spade here. This is more hiding from. And it matters not me personally or parliamentarians, but we represent the Canadian people. Democracy at its very heart is about being transparent. This government was supposed to be open by default. Now, when it comes in front of their legislation, the legislation they put forward, they literally will not even get in the same room as us. We stand here more than willing and ready to negotiate. They stand here as obstructionists. In fact, they don't even stand here. I don't know where they are. I suspect that they're in their offices in Parliament. It would literally, like, they could walk down there right now and be down here in the next 10 minutes, or willing to negotiate with us, talk to us, but instead they stand hiding in their offices, unwilling to come down and negotiate and talk with us. And so while Conservatives continue to stand for Canadians and willing, with literally arms open, to talk, they are held up in their offices literally 5 minutes from here. I think the Justice
Point of
Building...
order, Mr. Chair. Yeah. I would be very happy to, if we're willing to move and indeed started to work as Canadians want us to work, why don't we vote on the motion and get the work done?
Okay, it is not a point of order, but yeah.
Oh.
Thank you. MP Chattel, yes. And-
Mr. Chair, that was a little harsh there.
Into the record, I did see within the motion that the Deputy Prime Minister is asked to appear in this motion. I'm just saying.
I don't want to go too far in negotiations because I don't want to breach any confidence we have with the Liberals or the NDP party. But like I said, I don't think it would be telling tales of the school, and I don't think Mr. Beach or Mr. Blakey would disagree with me that a large part of the reason why we can't go ahead right now is a question of availability of the deputy leader over and above what is in that particular motion. So, I like I said, I do not want to go too much. I want to maintain that confidence with the Liberals and with the NDP, but to say I'm disappointed is more or less. And I would also, I think I'd be, I don't think I'd be being truthful and honest if I didn't thank the NDP for some excellent efforts in trying to broker a deal here. But here we stand in the room with the wonderful member from the Bloc Québécois and the terrific member from the NDP, but without a Liberal in the room. So I think many things can be taken from their lack of presence in here as to the type of meeting they were intending on having. And I can tell you that in all good faith and reason, Conservatives stand ready to negotiate, to move forward, and to work on the people's business. But that is extremely challenging to do without your negotiating partner even bothering to walk the 10 minutes from the Justice Building or from Confederation. So let's look at the fall economic statement, and let's look at why we want the Governor of the Bank of Canada and why we want the Deputy Leader of Finance in charge here. And we'll go back 7 years ago when this government came into power, and they told us a couple of things. One, they told us that the Liberals would be open by default. They also told us that they were going to be there to help the middle class and those attempting to join it. And so here's where we are with that right now. We have seen a government that has been plagued by scandal. Hardly a year, if not a month, goes by with some type of scandal involving this government, whether it be the SNC-Lavalin affair. And, the SNC-Lavalin affair is actually very instructive as to why Conservatives might want to do their democratic duty and do their due diligence and review this document, because hidden in I believe it was a budget, an omnibus legislation anyways, was the deferred prosecution agreement. And not one parliamentarian, including anyone from our party, to take full responsibility, was able to uncover that. And it wasn't until, of course, Jody Wilson-Raybould courageously stood up to the Prime Minister against his efforts to potentially direct an investigation, that it really came to light. And that's why it's absolutely critical that these documents, these documents are billions and billions and billions of dollars, and they have tremendous impact. And so I've never really understood why we need to rush these documents down because they can often cause as much harm. And we've actually seen this quite a bit with Liberal legislation that's been poorly drafted. They've had to go back and redraft it and reset it up because it doesn't work. Of course, the other scandal and major scandal was with respect to We Charity. We saw a company where the government attempted to give them $800 billion and $800 million. My apologies on that. Nearly $1 billion. In the reality is that this company actually gave the Trudeau family hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we still really haven't gotten to the bottom of that. Then we look at
Point of order, Chair.
Yep.
Point of order.
Yep. Point of order. Was that MP Baker?
It is. Once again, I believe that the rules of committee require members to debate the issue at hand. So just as a reminder, the issue at hand is the motion by Mr. Beach, amended by myself, which you read out earlier. I don't believe the member opposite is speaking to the issue at hand, and if they're not willing to debate the issue at hand, then we should put it to a vote.
Okay, thank you, MP Baker. Yes, if we could stick to the motion and as amended.
Thank you very
Lawrence.
much. Yeah, and I'll continue to do that. When we look at the We scandal, the challenge of that is, of course, we saw a lack of transparency, and then we, of course, saw the numerous other scandals along the way that really have impeded the credibility and trust of the Liberals as we go forward. And if we want to move from that, and I take your point, Mr. Chair and Mr. Baker, with respect to we want, of course, but I think the critical part of what I'm trying to say is we're trying to put this all in context as to why we might want to have the Deputy Leader, the Finance Minister, and the Governor of the Bank of Canada to talk about inflation. So 7 years ago, this government came in saying, we're here, Canada is back, we're going to be fighting for the middle class. Well, let's look at what has happened since then. So we had $100 billion of deficit spending before COVID ever hit our shores. That's $100 billion. And this was at the time, the Prime Minister said that there would be a tiny small deficit that you would barely even notice was there. I think the max was to be $10 billion. And of course, that blew up to over $100 billion in deficit spending. And because of that, their fiscal fireworks, as the then Minister of Finance, who was, of course, taken down over the We scandal, which I had talked about earlier, didn't have his much proclaimed fiscal firepower. And so, as I said, the government really only has then three ways of raising money. One way of raising money is with direct taxation. So they go out and they grab that, they go out there and they tax people. Well, Canadians are already heavily taxed. Amongst the highest taxes in the world are paid here in Canada. And so they were limited to then during the break of COVID. Of course, everyone was also in a difficult time. The economy was in slowdown, and so that wasn't really a realistic option for them. The other option they could go is they could go and borrow the money. And I don't know whether that was explored or not. I sort of assume it wasn't, not to any great extent, because what they chose to do was the third path, which is quantitative easing, which is the purchase and the sale and purchase of bonds by the government. And it really equates to the printing of money. And so the more you print money, the reality is we get inflation. This is what we're going back now to the fall economic statement and also to discussions about having the finance minister and also the deputy leader, Ms. Freeland, be in there, is because it's critical to understand where the inflation came from. And it's clear, I mean, Mark Carney agrees, Tiff Macklin agrees, that the inflation came from these Liberals. It is a Canadian-made phenomenon. Of course, we just had inflation again, staying stubbornly high. That inflation, it hits the middle class, and even more than that, the people who are attempting to join the middle class, those who are at the lower end of the economic spectrum, they're getting obliterated, and they are just getting absolutely hurt by inflation. We had a record high number of Canadians attend food banks in March of 2022 when it hit 1.5 million Canadians, which was fully a third of which were children, 500,000 kids. That's the impact. And it absolutely, to this day, it boggles my mind. And I don't believe the Prime Minister has ever apologized for these comments. When he said, I don't think about monetary policy, he said that right before we came into one of the worst monetary crises of my lifetime, at least 40 years. It hasn't been that high. And here we have the leader of a G7 country, one who's trying to cast himself as the dean of the G7, the most significant economic issue of our times, and he says right before it happens, is he doesn't think about monetary policy. Well, as I said in the House, that is relatively obvious, but the monetary policy is having a real impact on Canadians. It's not just numbers. It's not just spreadsheets. It's not just things that are studied at the finance committees. It is children who go hungry at night. It is kids. It is parents who can't afford winter clothes for their kids. It has a huge, huge impact. And quite frankly, it is so crocodile tears and disingenuousness when Liberals get up and they say, well, Conservatives didn't support this program. They didn't support this program. They don't have a heart. Well, you know what doesn't have a heart? It's just sitting there and watching inflation get higher and higher and higher, and watch young adults being unable to afford a house, watch parents unable to feed their children, and not doing anything. The fall economic statement, I haven't heard, and I've been in the discussions and heard some of the debate. I have not heard how it's going to combat inflation. What part of that combats inflation? What part of that's going to bring down inflation? What part of it? The cause or the disease is inflation, but the symptoms are the affordability crisis, and I don't see how this is possibly going to impact the affordability of this for my constituents, as I said before, in the with respect to the fall economic statement. Not one of my constituents was saying, you know what we really need, Phil? What we really need, Mr. Lawrence, is we need a 2% tax on share buybacks. Because the idea of that, of course, is that corporations won't release as much money. They'll invest more money in capital. And that will affect the affordability crisis sometime in maybe 2070. Like I said, I listen, as I said before, I wait to hear from the economists as to the actual impact. I have some skepticism whether a 2% tax will really make that dramatic of an impact on the capital. But I do have some ideas while my colleagues are attentive and listening about how we could do that. What could have been included in the fall economic statement is responsible industrial strategy that would have promoted innovation and productivity. These Liberals have driven down productivity and innovation. They also came to office saying, we believe in science, we believe in innovation and productivity. And I remember actually the early edition, the Paul Martin Liberals, had some pretty aggressive policies on driving innovation and productivity. Unfortunately, these Liberals seem not interested in economic growth. I actually asked the deputy finance minister whether he said economic growth was important, and he said he agreed with me 110%. And it is important, but with these Liberals, it just does not seem to you don't get an idea. Like, what is what's the big idea that came from this fall economic statement? What is this idea that's going to drive the Canadian economy into the next century? Like, we have real problems because these Liberals have hurt our productivity. We have the average Canadian per GDP earning per hour of GDP is about $50. The U.S. is 65. Ireland is around 80. Switzerland is even higher than that. We are at, and there's a direct correlation with that with how people live, because wages are directly impacted. In fact, if you look at all those countries, they rank in the same places with respect to real wages. And so this fall economic statement could have been a real opportunity to grow the economy, not just for the long term, not just for the short term, but for the long term. We have so many out of date income tax and regulatory provisions that this fall economic statement could have addressed. I know just on this panel alone, or on this committee alone, we have some great minds and some folks who have incredible history with tax policies, and I just wonder, why were they not put to work during this fall economic statement? Why were not some of their ideas captured on that, and we would take a big swing into taking Canada into owning the next century, right? It used to be that we would have leaders who would really carry that torch forward, like Wilfrid Laurier and others, having brave, bold pronouncements on what the future of Canada would be, and not just half measures and measures that don't affect the near term and they don't affect the long term. But instead of what we have, we just have more of the same. So here's a couple of other things that we could have put in the fall economic statement that I think would have made life better for Canada. We could have affected the cost of gas, home heating, and groceries. And how could we have done that? Well, we could have reduced the taxation of fuel because whether it be fossil fuels or otherwise, they are driving the costs of all of our economy, right? So there are, and we could have, even if you don't want to access the tax, even if you don't want to get rid of the carbon tax for whatever ideological purpose, I mean, clearly it hasn't accomplished its objective. We were number 58 out of 63, I think, in the recent COB report. And so this tax policy is a failure as an environmental policy, I think. And clearly, if we're driven down to 58 out of 63, and candidly, the Harper government had a much better record on emissions than the Trudeau government. That's just the fact. Without the carbon tax, we did better fighting emissions than we have done with the carbon tax. But even if you were a diehard believer in the carbon tax and that your ideology trumped all common sense and pragmatism, we would have thought that maybe there could have been an opportunity to pause the carbon tax just until inflation returned to 1% to 3% within the target range. We just give Canadians that little bit of break, because I can tell you, like, it's going to cost Canadians in my riding, and I hear from my East Coast fellas and women that it'll be even more. But just in my riding, it'll cost folks who have oil heat $5,000 to $10,000 to heat their homes, which is a huge amount of money, considering that they've already had if they've got a mortgage, their interest rates have gone up. If they're renting, if they can even find a rental, because the occupancy rate is about 99.5% or so in my riding. So that means there's basically no rental properties available. If they were able to get a mortgage, that means that they're now paying more if they had a variable rate, or they will at some point when they renew. And so life is getting much tougher for Canadians because of this. And then we see in this fall economic statement that they basically predict a recession. In talking to the officials, they gave us a quarterly breakdown, and in the quarterly breakdown, there were not two negative quarters. This much is true, but there was one negative quarter and one at 0.0%. That's cutting it pretty fine. It's almost like they engineered that so that there wasn't a forecasted recession. But we've got this recession on the horizon. We've got high interest rates. We've got high inflation. I think a reasonable option would have been to at least pause the carbon tax if they didn't want to eliminate the carbon tax altogether. But let's even give a step back there further and say, you know what, we this carbon tax, this tax policy is the signature piece, that in legalizing marijuana of the last 7 years, that in high inflation and high deficits, and so we as Liberals don't want to give that piece up, and so we're going to be blinded by our ideology. Well, maybe we could just reduce the HST on home heating fuel. Would that not be a reasonable solution to give Canadians a break? But they won't, like, it could have included that, a very small amount that wouldn't have saved the Treasury a huge amount, that wouldn't cost the Treasury a very large amount, but would have provided some real meaningful relief to Canadians. But I can tell you why they didn't do it, because they want power. They want the money to come to Ottawa so that they can control it, they can give it out, and they can take credit for it. I mean, quite frankly, it's so sad watching the Liberals pat themselves on the back for taking Canadians' money and giving it to other Canadians. They didn't earn that money. They didn't make that money. That was earned in Orono. That was earned in Brighton. That was earned in Campbellford. And so when that money comes back, and it's never the same amount that was given in, and I'll give you an example of that. So there was over $200 billion in non-COVID related spending, definite spending. That equates to about $5,000 for every woman, man, and child in Canada, or $20,000 for a family. I defy any of these members of committee to point to someone in their riding who got $20,000 worth of non-COVID related benefit from this federal government over the last couple years. And they don't exist because the government is inefficient at allocating those resources. So it makes more sense, instead of taking money, giving it to Ottawa bureaucrats, and then having it redistributed in accordance with the Liberal ideology, to just leave that money in the pockets of Canadians. And so we've said, okay, so we won't cut the carbon tax. We won't pause the carbon tax. We won't cut the GST. We won't pause the GST on home heating as we head into winter. How about this then? How about this? Well, we would stretch that compromise even further. How about you just remove the GST on the carbon tax? Just the GST on the carbon tax. Why could we not have put that in the fall economic statement? You know, it was amazing to me. I was actually in this very committee, and I was actually, I think it was the NEG committee. My apologies. And I was asking a finance department official with respect to the GST on the carbon tax, and he said to me that no, the GST wasn't on carbon tax. He didn't even know the fact that they charge a tax on a tax. Of course, some weeks or months later, we got a letter in a very word salady type of style saying, "Yeah, absolutely, you were right, Phil." Never an apology, not to me. I mean, I don't. I've got broad shoulders. But how about to the Canadians that were watching, or the Canadians that they misled? An apology that perhaps a finance official should know whether tax is charged on tax or not, whether the GST is charged on carbon tax. And you know, in small, it can be small amounts. If you live in downtown Toronto, like the finance minister, and you have all the access to a chauffeur and all that good stuff, or public transit, it may be a small amount. Now, if you're a farmer living in Saskatchewan or in Crammy, Ontario, it actually can be quite a large amount. And when my PMB, which is now moved on to Ben Lobb's PMB, which just got through, I believe, committee, and that PMB, I was getting receipts all the time for thousands of dollars, not just in carbon tax, but actually in GST on the carbon tax, right? A tax on a tax. And the wild part about that is when I asked the officials as to why they charge GST on the carbon tax, their only answer was, well, it's easier to do it that way. I don't think that's a good enough answer. And in a digital era where we can calculate huge, difficult calculations, millions of different transactions in splits of a second, I think that the federal government should be more than capable of being able to not charge the GST on the carbon tax if they chose not to. But so now we've got the carbon tax, we've got inflation, we've got interest rates. All of these things are piling on Canadians. And I think one of the critical pieces that we're also facing right now is a labor shortage in our economy. So it would make sense to me. I'm just a simple guy from rural Ontario, but it would make sense to me that if you want more of something, you incentivize it, you encourage it, you don't disincentivize it. So we need more labor. So part of that is of course having a fully functional and well-working, well-oiled immigration system, so that we can bring newcomers over and get them into our economy and working at a high rate. We definitely need newcomers to add that. To add that to our economy, to add that extra labor to our economy. And anyone who's got a constituency office, I'm sure all 338 of us have struggled with the immigration office, as people are desperately, one, trying to be reunified with family members they haven't seen for years. I've had some just absolutely, I've gone through boxes of Kleenex hearing the horrible stories of families being disunited, but also the economic impact of people who want nothing more, and they have tremendous skills. So I was talking to one individual. He's an IT gentleman from another country, and he wants to come to our country. And he's working on technology that could be worth millions and billions to the Canadian economy. That could be worth thousands of jobs. But do you think that the immigration system can get him into Canada? Nope. I have another individual who's a doctor and is a great doctor in one of our communities. And his only request to continuing to be a doctor is that his wife be allowed to come to his country. It's been 2 years he's been waiting for his wife to be given permission to come to Canada. And he's now threatening to say, I can't do this anymore. I can't live without my wife and my children for this long. All because the immigration system is breaking. But the other part of it is we need to encourage folks that already live in our country to be as productive as we can, and quite frankly, we need to reward them. But when we look at, I particularly think of seniors of this. Many seniors, because of inflation and other reasons, are being forced back into the labor market, even if they don't want to, because they can't afford it. If they are at the lower end of the economic spectrum, maybe they aren't receiving a huge CPP check, and perhaps they only have OAS and GIS, they are facing a dollar-to-dollar clawback. For nearly dollar-for-dollar clawback in their return to the work. I don't think any Canadian should ever be in the position of being worse off for going to work. I believe that the workers should be celebrated, venerated, and rewarded, and that no Canadian should be disincentivized to go to work. Because I know Canadians, we're hardworking people, and even if we are disincentivized, we'll still go to work because we know it's the right thing to do. But the fact that the government would disincentivize that, and like the Prime Minister once famously said that something to the fact that people at the low economic spectrum don't pay taxes, and that's just untrue. Mr. Chair, I'll raise this rhetorically because you can't answer because I've got the floor. I suppose you could, but no one else could, I guess. But the personal exemption is $14,000 in Canada. That means that you earn more than $14,000, you start paying federal income tax. So when we talk about all these great benefits for Canadians, why don't we just stop taking as much money as we do from Canadians? Why do we start taxing people at $14,000? Does that not seem a bit low to people here? And then we add the GIS clawback for seniors, and so very modest income Canadians can be facing tax rates of 40 or 50%. I get it. I get it. If you were found guilty in the Panama Papers of tax evasion, we should throw the book at you. There's no doubt. Every Canadian should pay their fair share of taxes. And I'm sure that there's some reason why going on, it's got to be close to a decade now, that the Panama Papers came out, that we haven't charged one individual, we haven't collected $1 with respect to the folks who were called out in the Panama Papers. I'm sure there's some reason why we're taxing the single mom starting at $14,000, and why the billionaire, trillionaire who's got offshore assets and was called out in the Panama Papers is still not facing any type of prosecution. As the CRA, who I remember quite ably questioned by Mr. Peter Julian of the NDP party, and was stated numerous times to the CRA, asked numerous times, how many dollars, how many people have been charged? And the answer was over and over again, none, none, none. And then we would hear from the CRA some more word salad, really, saying, well, it's complicated, it's difficult, there's different things we're looking on, you don't understand necessarily about that. Well, I do understand, and to me it's incredibly inequitable. Like I said, we start taxing hardworking Canadians, the federal income tax, at $14,000. That's not even taking into account HST and other environmental fees, other taxes. Oh, and there's the carbon tax as well, that Canadians are facing. So it seems so hypocritical when I hear the Liberals get up in the House and other places and say, we have Canadians back. No, you have Canadians' wallet. And you're giving out a little bit of that money back and expecting to be patted on the shoulders, while you, all the way, take more power and get ready to sprinkle the money right before an election that you've collected from other Canadians. So I think I might take a brief respite, but just to rest assured to my colleagues, because I know that they're eager to hear more. That I've got. I could talk for, I don't know, days on this, I guess. Yeah, and so I'm more than willing to talk this out. But maybe if they wanted to, I don't know, be in the room with us, that perhaps we could have some productive negotiation and get on with this and move forward. It's clear there's all the Conservatives are in the room, ready to negotiate, ready to talk, and all the Liberals aren't here, and so you can judge from that what you think there. So like I said, I'll just take a brief respite there, and look forward to hearing my colleagues talk.
Thank you, MP Lawrence. I have MP Morantz, then MP Beach, and MP Chattel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The motion that
I'll need to get back on the list. Sorry.
The motion that we're debating in this meeting, by the way, I have to say, it is kind of surreal. Like, I'm looking across the room for all those who might be watching the live feed, and there are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 empty chairs where the Liberals normally sit. But it is too bad that they're not here, so we could try and actually get on with the important study of the fall economic statement. But having said that, the motion that's before us, I want to read it into the record again, just in case some people might have tuned in, since it was read in last time and didn't have the opportunity to hear what it is that we're actually discussing. So the motion says that the chair schedule meetings to initiate a pre-study on the Act to implement certain provisions of the fall economic statement, and that the first meeting take place on Monday, November 14th, should legislation be presented in the House by that time, and that the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance be invited to appear with her officials on the bill. that all evidence gathered as part of the pre-study be considered as evidence in the committee's full study of the bill. And should the bill be referred to committee by Thursday, November 24th, A, clause by clause study of the bill commence no later than Wednesday, November 30th, B, that amendments to the bill be submitted by 5 p.m. EST Thursday, November 24th, and that the committee immediately proceed to the study and hear from officials from the Department of Finance. So there are really two parts to this this motion, from what I can see. The first part relates to a pre-study. So I think I'll talk about that part first. So the very first line says that the chair schedule meetings. And one of the pet peeves I have with the motion is how imprecise it is. You know, we're asking, this is a bill that, by all accounts from the Parliamentary Budget Officer, increases spending by at least $50 billion over the next 5 years, and yet it just says meetings. So it's very open-ended. It doesn't say how many meetings. Is it one meeting? Is it 5 meetings? You know, when are the meetings going to be? It just doesn't tell us. It's hard to vote for something when you don't know what you're voting for, Mr. Chair. So you know, going on, it goes on to say that should the legislation be presented in the House by that time, and that the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, who, just for those who are watching to understand, that's one person. It's Minister Freeland. She holds both of those positions. She is both the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. And I'm just saying that because I don't want anyone who happens to be watching to think that we're talking about two separate people. This is only one person that we're asking or inviting to come before the committee, and it goes on to say with her officials, but it doesn't say for how long the minister is invited to appear, or even how many times, how many meetings she will attend. Will she be here for 15 minutes, for 60 minutes, for an hour, maybe a couple of different meetings for an hour or more? So it's just the lack of clarity in the motion is really, it's just astounding. And it even goes further. It says, well, she is invited to appear with her officials. But again, it doesn't tell us which officials. We have no idea who's going to be appearing before the committee because the motion just says her officials. We don't know who they're going to be or who she might bring. And it would certainly be nice when I'm voting for something, I certainly like to know what it is that I'm voting for, but I can't tell because the motion doesn't give that information. So you know, just on the face of it, the first part of the motion around the pre-study is just so vague and imprecise that it would be hard really to support under any circumstances. Now, the second part actually deals with a situation where we're out of the pre-study, where what's supposed to happen, just to clarify it for those people who are watching, the normal process is that a bill is debated in the House of Commons, and then as many MPs who want to get up to speak to it. In fact, there are people speaking on the bill all this week. I spoke on Monday night about C-32. But once that's done, there's a vote in the House, and if it passes the House, then it is referred to committee. So the second part of the motion that we're talking about right now talks about that event. You know, it says, should the bill be referred to committee by Thursday, November 24th? By the way, I just want to backtrack to the first part of the motion. I forgot to mention something. I also find it interesting that we're not inviting other ministers. So, for example, given the increases in revenue that are set forth in the tables of the fall economic statement, and the commensurate increases in spending, and the increase in our debt, which is now $1.2 trillion, I thought it would have been a nice idea if the motion had actually included an invitation to the Minister of National Revenue. Certainly, the Minister of National Revenue is an important piece of this study, I believe, but it would be easier to discuss this if our Liberal colleagues were actually in the room, but they're on a TV monitor right now, so they're not really available. But in any event, hopefully next meeting they will actually be here. But why not the Minister of National Revenue? We could ask her all kinds of questions. How much additional personal income tax revenue is she anticipating on an annualized basis year over year between 22, 23, and 27, 28? We could ask her how much of an increase in corporate tax revenue the agency is considering over that period of time. We could ask her how much additional revenue. This would be very, very interesting information to have if she were invited to appear as to, for example, how much additional revenue the tripling of the carbon tax is going to generate, and whether or not, as the government says, the Canadians will in fact be made whole, because there's obviously a big question as to whether or not the amount of carbon tax Canadians are paying is actually commensurate with the rebates that they're getting. But you know, she's not in we could ask her about the GST as well, you know, and what the forecasts are around GST revenues, because at the end of the day, this is you know, whatever you want to call it, the fall economic statement or a mini budget, it's a spending bill, it's a money bill. And I think it's just not insufficient to have just the Minister of Finance. In fact, you could have other ministers appear. For example, the fall economic statement talks about the creation of Canadian Innovation and Investment Agency. I'm not sure which minister would be overseeing that particular agency, but it would be interesting to hear from those ministers. But again, the motion itself is just so vague and ambiguous. It's impossible to vote for because we just don't know exactly what it is that we're voting for. So now, going to the second part of the motion. Now, again, you know, this is the part that, you know, the House is now debated, and every member of Parliament has done their duty in the House who wanted to speak to the bill has done so, and the House actually voted. And the House voted to refer to committee, and that's not a sure thing either. You know, like I realize the NDP is propping up the Liberals right now, but, you know, stranger things have happened. I remember very well, I was 17 years old on, I think it was November of 1979 when Joe Clark's government fell on a budget bill, and they didn't expect it. So I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that this fall economic statement would pass the House, and I don't want to prejudge the will of Parliament, but that's what this motion does as well. It prejudges the will of Parliament by asking for a pre-study. But in any event, you know, we're, you know, as Conservatives, we're willing to consider a pre-study. But again, I mean, the motion is so ambiguous; it's hard to know exactly what that pre-study would entail. But so now let's this bill again. It assumes a lot. It's assuming that the House has now passed it. So okay, so be it. The bill is now before the committee. So then the motion goes on to say, in A, clause by clause study of the bill commence no later than Wednesday, November 30th. Well, this is November 16th, and this is a massive spending bill. It's at a time, you know, when it's already, the point's already been made. We asked the government not to increase spending and not to increase taxes, and they did both of those things. So given the magnitude of spending, the increases in taxes, the share buyback tax, and all of these things, I'm not sure really that November 30th is enough time. As I said, there are a number of ministers that really ought to come before the committee so that we can ask questions of them. There are other witnesses, expert witnesses, who can testify as to the economic considerations around the passage of the fall economic statement by this committee and what amendments we might consider. So I'm not really convinced that November 30th is enough time. You know, as I said, there's $50 billion at least in new spending. The fall economic statement bumps up the deficit to over $1.2 trillion. So this is not a matter to be taken lightly. So I don't know why this motion wants to. I fear that in its haste, we might miss important information that would inform us as to how we should vote on such an important matter. Now, then B says, well, the amendments to the bill must be submitted by 5 p.m. Thursday, November 24th. Well, that's even sooner. And again, I say, and I want to make sure, like I am speaking directly to the motion. So this is the 16th. I don't know how we could possibly hear from all the different ministers and witnesses that we would need to hear from before that time to have well-considered amendments proposed to the bill that hasn't even passed the House yet. So, and then it says, and that the committee immediately proceed to the study and hear from officials from the Department of Finance. And again, I get back to the same point I made earlier on the first part of the motion, which is, well, which officials? Who are they sending? It would be helpful to know so that we could prepare in advance our questions and make sure that we are, and we could also ask for potentially other officials that for example, officials from the CRA. Why is it just officials from the Department of Finance? Why wouldn't the Minister of National Revenue come with her officials as well? Given the magnitude of the spending and taxation in the bill, I really am confounded, frankly, as to why the Minister of National Revenue is not being invited. So there's a number of problems with the bill. Now, the fall economic statement was just introduced by the minister on November 3rd. So I think it's important because a lot of times people don't realize that there is actually correspondence that goes back and forth between the leader of our party and the leader of the and the Minister of Finance, the Deputy Prime Minister, and so our leader sent a letter to the Minister of Finance on October 30th, which was 4 days before the actual introduction of the fall economic statement, and in that letter, he sets out some very important concepts. And so I'm going to just take a minute. It's not very long. It's about a page and a half. I'm going to read it into the record, Mr. Chair, because I think it's going to be very important to have this information in the record so that we can properly consider how we might move forward with this matter. So it's dated October 30th, addressed to the Honourable Chrystia Freeland, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance of the House of Commons. It says, "Dear Mr. Freeland, Canadians are struggling. Many are barely hanging on. This week's fall economic statement comes at a critical moment. As leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition, I write to make clear our expectations from the statement. But first, let's assess the situation we're in and how we got here. Inflation is at a 40-year high. Interest rates are increasing at the fastest rate in decades. The cost of government is driving up the cost of living. Justin Trudeau's inflationary deficits to the tune of $500 billion have sent more dollars chasing fewer goods. This bids up the goods we buy and the interest we pay. Inflationary taxes increase the cost of making those goods. The more government spends, the more things cost. Justin Trudeau has doubled Canada's debt and added more debt than all other Canadian prime ministers combined. Paychecks didn't go as far as they used to. Canadians are cutting their diets. We recently learned that Canadians visited food banks 1.5 million times in a single month. That's a 35% increase since 2019. Mothers are putting water in their children's milk because they cannot afford 10% yearly food inflation. Seniors can't afford to heat their homes, and winter is coming. Home prices have doubled, so 35-year-olds live in their parents' basements. According to Bloomberg, Canada has the second most inflated housing bubble in the world. Monthly payments on mortgages are rising even as house prices are dropping. Canadians are out of money. Consumer debt has skyrocketed. Rising interest rates caused by inflationary deficits means that this debt costs even more now. The bubble is finally bursting, and the bill is finally coming due. For years, my warnings that out-of-control spending would balloon inflation and then interest rates were ignored. Now, a leaked letter, the government seems to agree with me. Even the Prime Minister now talks of fiscal responsibility. If the reversal is sincere, there is one way to prove it. Stop. Stop the taxes. No new taxes. This includes canceling all planned tax hikes, canceling the tripling of the carbon tax. Any new spending by ministers must be matched by an equivalent savings. I look forward to reading the fall economic statement this week, Minister Freeland, sincerely, and it's signed the Honorable Pierre Poilievre, leader of the official opposition. What's interesting, and now that I think about it, is that there was never a letter sent in reply from the Minister of Finance to the leader of the opposition, which would have been a nice courtesy. So, but now, the reason I read the letter into the record is because what the leader of the opposition is saying is basically the increasing the money supply and the massive deficit spending is what's really caused inflation, and taxes just makes things even more expensive. So that was the medicine that he prescribed to the Minister of Finance, and very reasonable suggestions. I think most people, the average Canadians, the average middle class Canadian, and those working hard to join the middle class, I think would agree that those are very reasonable suggestions. Of course, it's the middle class and those who are working hard to join it who are the most disappointed Canadian people in this country right now, because of how this government has managed their hard-earned tax dollars. So with that, Mr. Chair, there's so much to say about this, and I think I would like to say more, but I think I will cede the floor at this time, and but I'll ask to be put back on the speaking list, and so I'll have the opportunity to revisit this issue and bring forward some other important revelations with respect to Bill C-32 that I really believe need to be put on the record at this very important time. So thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair, and I cede the floor.
Merci, MP Morantz, and we'll hear from PS Beach and MP Chattel after that. And then did I see that? No, that's right. So PS Beach.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's good to see everyone. And I do want to thank all members involved in the many conversations that have happened over the last number of days. The motion on the floor with regards to the FES and the amendment is an original motion that was brought up almost 2 weeks ago. All of the Liberal members, of course, are here at committee and are ready to work. I understand that the Conservatives would like an audience for their current acts of obstruction of the democratic process. I mean, this is the third day, or I guess 2.5 or 2 and a partial day of Conservative filibuster on this. We've had consistent discussions on a path forward. I think my colleagues will recognize that my response time has been within generally minutes, if not seconds. People reaching out to me, including today during this particular discussion. And, you know, we did actually get to a solution, and then it was reneged upon. And then, you know, if there was any objective observer of the discussion, I mean, the government side has moved, I would say 99% of the way, where the Conservatives have not moved at all, not an inch, which mirrors kind of the obstruction behavior that we've seen in the House of Commons. In fact, we got to a point where we agreed with all of the Conservative priorities all the way through Christmas, including the minister arriving and testifying, including the governor of the Bank of Canada, and other legislative priorities and private member bills and the like. So I don't think any objective observer of the discussion, I don't want to get into more details of that, and I hope that members feel that this synopsis is respective of our discussions without getting into too many details. But I do want to assure my colleagues on the other side who may not have been directly involved on every step of the way that we continue to be open, we continue to be reasonable. And, you know, we do have a need to continue with government business. There is the important legislation which has been talked about briefly, not thoroughly summarized, but there are time-sensitive measures in there, like the recovery dividend, like interest on student loans. Those will have a tremendous impact if the Conservatives are successful at continuing to obstruct and hold up study. And they will also be the first ones, if we ever get to study the fall economic statement, to talk about how there isn't enough time to study it, despite the fact that, you know, we've lost at least two full days and a partial day, and potentially other time during the constituency week that we could have worked as well. So I think I just wanted to take this time to get our defense on the record. I still have all of my communication devices in front of me, still available for any discussions that want to continue. But every notion that I've seen thus far is that there doesn't appear to be a path forward, and I look forward to continuing to hear from my Conservative I don't look forward to hear. I do genuinely look forward to hearing all their thoughts on the fall economic statement, but not under the current pretenses.
Freudian slip.
PS Beach is, yep, okay, so I've got MP Chattel.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair. I'm new in politics. I see this for the first time. It's the first time that I'm part of this type of filibuster. I was ready to work on the fall economic statement. I'm very disappointed not to be able to work with my colleagues on that. What MP Beach worked very, very hard on to try to find a solution to satisfy our Conservative colleagues. But if you will allow me, Mr. Chair, as a new politician, I can speak for everybody, every Canadian. I'm not like Conservative MPs who have been in politics since they left teenagehood. I'm here to represent Canadians who currently are having trouble. And honestly, I think that many of my colleagues, Conservatives, Bloc members, we all feel the difficulty in our ridings. We speak to a lot of people. And for me, the economic statement, the fall economic statement, the legislation, studying it, talking to civil servants, because there's very important measures in that. It is very important. So wasting our time with something that comes back to Romantic ages, the filibuster, which goes back to Julius Caesar, is a waste of time, a total waste of time. Of course, I understand the dissatisfaction of Conservatives. They've lost their elections. They would like to be in power. They're not. They're frustrated. Yes, frustrating. But you still have to be able to work together. Work for Canadians.
We need to work for Canadians. There's such important measures in the fall economic statement, and that is why we are here. It's to talk about them. We want to talk about eliminating interest on student loans. It's especially important for me here in Quebec. I want to know what is going to be done to eliminate the interest for Quebec students, because there's a different process for student loans in Quebec. I feel like talking about that. I also want to talk about the housing subsidies, as well as the elimination of transaction fees for SMEs. In rural ridings, there are a lot of SMEs, and that represents a lot of money for them. I would like to know how this is going to apply. I want to participate in the passing of these measures. I also want to talk about what is being done so that we can succeed in tomorrow's economy. I want to talk about the Canada Growth Fund, for example, that will help a lot of companies go through the transition towards being profitable. There are a lot of things going on in our economy. There are a lot of things that had to be done to prepare tomorrow's economy. We are here for Canadians. It's one of our fundamental values. We are supposed to work with the Conservatives, with the NDP, with everyone. We are here to help Canadians. We're there to serve them. It's not just by filibustering that we are going to achieve all of this. So I hope that we will manage to work together in a serious manner. We were elected to represent the same people. We're not talking about different people here. It's important to work together. We have to look at this fall economic statement together. I would certainly like to vote on Mr. Beach's motion as amended by MP Baker so that we can finally start discussing this with him, with the Deputy Prime Minister, with the senior officials who can answer any technical questions that we will have, so that we can discuss this with subject witnesses, people who know about these suggested measures. I really want to work together. So I am asking you to please call the vote now so that we can discuss this and meet our witnesses. It's not that I don't like to listen to MP Lawrence, but he isn't the expert in all of these measures. We are here to hear the experts. And yes, it will be a pleasure afterwards to go and have a drink and listen to Mr. Lawrence talk. But this committee has to work with the experts to give us answers on the economic questions we have, instead of wasting our time. And also wasting taxpayers' money, frankly. We were elected to work hard for them and not to have sessions like what we've seen this week and this one today. So once again, my sincere request on behalf of all Canadians who want us to work together because we represent the same people, so that we can pass this motion and so that we will be able to talk about the fall economic statement. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Chatel.
Merci, Mr. Chair. And to finally put an end to this Liberal filibuster, we'd like to have a recorded vote at this moment, at this time. Thank you.
I see no further speakers. A recorded vote, clerk. This is on the motion as amended. We're voting on MP Beach's motion as it was changed through a friendly amendment.
Okay, so we are taking the vote. So I'm going to call each of you. So Mr. Baker.
In favor.
Mr. Beach.
In favor.
Madame Chatel.
En faveur.
Ms. Kayabaga.
En faveur aussi.
Mr. MacDonald.
In favor.
Mr. Chambers.
Against.
Mr. Helen,
Against.
Mr. Lawrence,
Against.
Mr. Morens,
Against.
Mr. Sainte-Marie,
Contre.
Mr. Blakey,
In favor.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
Okay, motion passes. Carried.
Let's go for a drink.
MP Blakey.
We've all done a lot of work around the table today under a certain definition anyway, and I would like to move that we adjourn.
I believe that's sage advice. Looking around the room. Members, we're adjourned.
No, wait.
On division.